Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that a Fresno Police Department officer observes an individual in a parked vehicle exhibiting behavior that strongly suggests the individual is engaged in illegal narcotics activity, including furtive movements and the exchange of small packages. The officer has a clear view of the vehicle and its occupant. Considering the legal framework governing searches and seizures in California, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and legally sound response for the officer? Option A. Wait for a patrol supervisor to arrive on scene and then decide whether to search the vehicle without seeking a warrant. Option B. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the suspicion of illegal narcotics activity. Option C. Immediately begin the process to obtain a search warrant for the vehicle based on the observed probable cause. Option D. Contact a supervisor and, upon their verbal instruction, proceed with a warrantless search of the vehicle. Correct answer is C. Immediately begin the process to obtain a search warrant for the vehicle based on the observed probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the established legal and ethical boundaries governing police investigations in California. The officer must act decisively, but also within the confines of the law, particularly concerning privacy rights and the proper procedures for obtaining evidence. Failure to do so could compromise the investigation, lead to inadmissible evidence, and result in civil or criminal liability for the officer and the Fresno Police Department. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately initiating the process to obtain a warrant based on the observed probable cause. This approach is correct because it respects the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and California's specific legal framework that mandates judicial oversight for intrusive searches. By seeking a warrant, the officer is demonstrating due diligence, ensuring that the investigation proceeds with legal authorization, and safeguarding the integrity of any evidence gathered. This aligns with the principles of lawful policing and due process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating a search of the vehicle without any warrant or immediate exigent circumstances would be a direct violation of Fourth Amendment protections and California search and seizure laws. This approach disregards the requirement for probable cause to be reviewed by a neutral magistrate before a search can be legally conducted, potentially rendering any discovered evidence inadmissible in court and exposing the department to legal challenges. Contacting a supervisor to discuss the situation, but then proceeding with a search based solely on the supervisor's verbal instruction, without a warrant, also fails to meet legal standards. While seeking guidance is prudent, a supervisor's directive cannot override constitutional requirements for a warrant in this context. This approach bypasses the necessary legal safeguards and places the officer in a position of acting unlawfully. Delaying any action until a warrant can be obtained, even if the situation appears suspicious, could be problematic if the observed circumstances constitute exigent circumstances that justify immediate action to prevent the destruction of evidence or a threat to public safety. However, in this specific scenario, the observed activity, while suspicious, does not immediately suggest an imminent threat or destruction of evidence that would bypass the warrant requirement. The primary failure here is not the delay itself, but the lack of proactive legal engagement when probable cause exists. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. When probable cause is established for a search, the immediate step should be to document the observations thoroughly and initiate the warrant application process. This involves consulting with supervisors and legal advisors to ensure the application is robust and legally sound. If exigent circumstances are clearly present and documented, that would be a separate consideration, but the default and preferred method for searches is judicial authorization. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that Fresno Police Department, FPD, officers have encountered a situation where a suspect, believed to be involved in a series of recent burglaries across Fresno, has fled into a private residence. Officers have reason to believe the suspect may be in possession of stolen property and potentially a weapon. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the FPD officers to take regarding the suspect's electronic device, which is visible on a table inside the residence? Option A. Access the contents of the electronic device without a warrant, assuming the suspect has no expectation of privacy once inside their residence. Option B. Seek a search warrant from a judge, presenting probable cause that the device contains evidence related to the burglaries. Option C. Wait indefinitely to obtain a search warrant, even if the suspect is actively attempting to destroy the device or flee with it. Option D. Seize the electronic device immediately without a warrant, based on the officer's suspicion that it may contain evidence. The correct answer is B. Seek a search warrant from a judge, presenting probable cause that the device contains evidence related to the burglaries. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual privacy and due process. Officers must act swiftly, but also within the bounds of the law and departmental policy to avoid compromising the investigation or violating citizens' rights. The potential for misinterpretation of information and the sensitive nature of the data involved necessitate careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. By seeking a warrant, officers demonstrate to a neutral magistrate that they have sufficient probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found at the specified location. This process ensures that law enforcement actions are judicially authorized and grounded in legal justification, thereby respecting individual privacy rights while still enabling the investigation of potential criminal activity. This adheres to established legal precedent and departmental guidelines for conducting searches. Incorrect approaches analysis. Seizing the device without a warrant based solely on the officer's suspicion that it might contain evidence of a crime is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This approach bypasses the requirement for probable cause and judicial oversight, leading to an illegal search and seizure. Any evidence obtained through such a seizure would likely be inadmissible in court under the exclusionary rule. Accessing the device's contents without a warrant, even if the device was lawfully seized under exigent circumstances, which are not clearly established here, is also a violation of privacy rights. While exigent circumstances might justify a temporary seizure to prevent destruction of evidence, accessing the data itself typically requires a warrant or specific consent. This approach disregards the need for a warrant to delve into the private information stored on the device. Delaying the investigation indefinitely until a warrant can be obtained, even if there is a potential public safety threat, could be professionally negligent if the threat is immediate and severe. While warrants are crucial, there are narrow exceptions for exigent circumstances where immediate action is necessary to prevent death or serious bodily harm, or to prevent the destruction of evidence. Unnecessarily delaying action in such a situation could have grave consequences and would not represent sound professional judgment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered decision-making process. First, assess the situation for immediate threats to life or safety and the potential for evidence destruction. Second, consult departmental policy and legal counsel regarding the applicable laws and procedures for searches and seizures, particularly concerning electronic devices. Third, if probable cause exists and no immediate exigent circumstances justify a warrantless action, pursue a warrant. If exigent circumstances are present, document them meticulously and act only to the extent necessary to mitigate the exigency, with the intention of seeking post-seizure judicial review. Always prioritize constitutional rights and legal compliance. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates that a Fresno Police Department, FPD, officer has stopped a vehicle for a minor traffic violation in Fresno, California. The officer has a hunch that the driver might be involved in recent burglaries, but lacks specific probable cause to search the vehicle. The officer approaches the driver and asks if they can search the vehicle. Which of the following actions best upholds the legal and ethical standards for law enforcement in California? Option A. Searching the vehicle's trunk under the pretext of looking for evidence related to the initial traffic violation. Option B. Conducting a search of the vehicle based on the officer's suspicion of involvement in recent burglaries. Option C. Threatening the driver with further citations if they do not consent to a vehicle search. Option D. Requesting voluntary consent from the driver to search the vehicle after informing them of their right to refuse. The correct answer is D. requesting voluntary consent from the driver to search the vehicle after informing them of their right to refuse. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the established legal and ethical boundaries governing police investigations in California. The officer must consider the rights of the individual, the integrity of the investigation, and the potential consequences of obtaining information through improper means. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any information gathered is admissible and obtained in a manner that upholds public trust and departmental standards. The best professional practice involves obtaining consent from the individual before conducting a search of their vehicle. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and further elaborated by California law. Obtaining voluntary and informed consent is the most legally sound and ethically defensible method for searching a vehicle without probable cause or a warrant. It ensures that the search is conducted with the individual's permission, thereby avoiding potential legal challenges and maintaining the integrity of the evidence. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a search of the vehicle based solely on the officer's hunch or suspicion that the individual might be involved in criminal activity. This violates the Fourth Amendment's requirement for probable cause or a warrant for searches, and in California, such a search would be deemed unlawful, rendering any evidence found inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach would be to pressure or coerce the individual into consenting to the search. While consent is obtained, it is not voluntary if obtained through duress, threats, or misrepresentation. This would invalidate the consent and lead to the exclusion of any evidence discovered, as well as potential disciplinary action against the officer for violating ethical guidelines and departmental policy regarding the fair treatment of individuals. A further incorrect approach would be to search the vehicle under the guise of a routine traffic stop infraction, without any independent basis for suspicion of further criminal activity. While officers can conduct searches incident to arrest or based on probable cause related to the initial stop, expanding the search beyond the scope of the infraction without justification would be an overreach and a violation of the individual's rights. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. When faced with a situation where a search is contemplated, the officer should first assess if probable cause exists. If not, the next step is to consider obtaining voluntary consent. This involves clearly explaining the reason for the request, informing the individual of their right to refuse consent, and ensuring that any consent given is freely and voluntarily provided. If consent cannot be obtained or is not legally valid, the officer must then rely on established legal exceptions to the warrant requirement, such as probable cause coupled with exigent circumstances, or a lawful search incident to arrest. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that during a routine traffic stop in Fresno, California, an officer observes furtive movements by the driver and a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. The driver appears nervous, but is cooperative when asked for their license and registration. Before inquiring further about the contents of the vehicle or the driver's activities, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the Fresno Police Department officer to take regarding the driver's constitutional rights? Option A. Clearly and politely inform the driver of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before asking any questions that might elicit an incriminating response. Option B. Immediately question the driver about the odor and any suspected contraband within the vehicle to gather information quickly. Option C. Detain the driver for an extended period without further questioning until a supervisor arrives to provide guidance on how to proceed. Option D. Proceed with a search of the vehicle based on the odor of marijuana, assuming the driver has implicitly waived their rights due to their nervousness and cooperation. Correct answer is A. Clearly and politely inform the driver of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before asking any questions that might elicit an incriminating response. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the constitutional rights of an individual during a traffic stop. The officer must make a judgment call on how to proceed without unduly infringing upon the suspect's rights, which could lead to evidence being suppressed if handled improperly. The potential for misinterpretation of the suspect's demeanor and the urgency of the situation add to the complexity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly and politely informing the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney, as mandated by Miranda v. Arizona, before asking any questions that might elicit an incriminating response. This approach respects the individual's Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination and Sixth Amendment right to counsel. By providing these warnings, the officer ensures that any subsequent statements made by the individual are admissible in court, assuming the warnings are understood and voluntarily waived. This aligns with the due process requirements and the established legal standards for custodial interrogation in California. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately questioning the individual about their activities and destination without providing Miranda warnings. This directly violates the Fifth Amendment rights of the individual. Any incriminating statements obtained through such questioning would likely be deemed inadmissible in court under the exclusionary rule, as it would be considered compelled self-incrimination. This failure to adhere to constitutional protections undermines the integrity of the investigation and the legal process. Another incorrect approach is to detain the individual for an extended period without probable cause or reasonable suspicion to believe a crime has been committed, solely to wait for a supervisor or legal counsel to advise on questioning. While caution is important, prolonged detention without legal justification can constitute an unlawful seizure. Furthermore, delaying necessary procedural steps like Miranda warnings can create an appearance of impropriety and may still lead to the suppression of evidence if the detention itself is found to be unlawful. A third incorrect approach is to assume the individual has waived their rights simply because they are cooperative or answer initial non-incriminating questions. Miranda rights are not automatically waived by cooperation. A knowing, intelligent, and voluntary waiver is required before interrogation can commence. Proceeding with questioning without explicit confirmation of waiver, even if the individual seems amenable, is a significant legal and ethical misstep. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and established legal procedures. This involves a clear understanding of Miranda v. Arizona and its application in traffic stop scenarios. The officer must assess whether the situation has escalated to a custodial interrogation, which triggers the requirement for Miranda warnings. If it has, the officer must administer the warnings accurately and ensure the individual understands them before proceeding with questioning. Documentation of the Miranda advisement and any waiver is crucial. In situations of uncertainty, erring on the side of caution by providing the warnings is the most prudent course of action to protect the integrity of the investigation and uphold legal standards. Question 5. The control framework reveals that when responding to a call regarding a potential weapon and observing an individual exhibiting furtive movements and appearing to conceal an object in their waistband, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for a Fresno Police Department officer to take to balance public safety and individual rights, adhering to California law and FPD policy? Option A. Draw their firearm and order the individual to the ground without any overt aggressive action from the individual. Option B. Immediately detain the individual and demand they empty their pockets without further observation. Option C. Proceed with the patrol without investigating the individual or the report. Option D. Conduct a brief, non-intrusive pat-down for weapons, limited to the outer clothing, based on the observed behavior and the report of a potential weapon. The correct answer is D. Conduct a brief, non-intrusive pat-down for weapons, limited to the outer clothing, based on the observed behavior and the report of a potential weapon. Explanation. The control framework reveals the critical importance of balancing public safety with individual rights when responding to calls for service. This scenario is professionally challenging because Officer Miller must make an immediate decision with incomplete information, where a misjudgment could have severe consequences for the public, the individual, and the department's reputation. The need for swift action in a potentially volatile situation requires a nuanced understanding of FPD policy and California law regarding reasonable suspicion and probable cause. The best approach involves Officer Miller conducting a brief, non-intrusive pat-down for weapons, limited to the outer clothing of the individual, based on the specific, articulable facts that the individual is exhibiting furtive movements and appears to be concealing something in their waistband, coupled with the report of a potential weapon. This is correct because it aligns with the legal standard of reasonable suspicion, which allows officers to briefly detain and pat down an individual if they have a reasonable belief that the person is armed and dangerous. This action is a minimal intrusion designed solely to ensure officer safety and the safety of others, without infringing on the individual's rights beyond what is necessary to address the immediate threat. This is further supported by California Penal Code Section 1538(5), which outlines the permissible scope of searches based on reasonable suspicion. An incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to immediately attempt to detain the individual and demand they empty their pockets without any further observation or interaction. This is professionally unacceptable because it escalates the situation unnecessarily and lacks the requisite reasonable suspicion to justify a detention and search beyond a protective pat-down. It presumes guilt rather than investigating a potential threat. Another incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to ignore the report and the observed behavior, proceeding without any investigation. This is professionally unacceptable, as it constitutes a failure to uphold the duty to protect the public and investigate potential criminal activity, potentially leaving the community vulnerable to harm. A further incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to immediately draw their firearm and order the individual to the ground without any overt aggressive action from the individual. While officer safety is paramount, this level of force would likely be deemed excessive and not based on specific, articulable facts indicating an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury, potentially violating Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable seizures. The professional reasoning process for officers in such situations should involve: 1. Assess the totality of the circumstances, including the initial report, observed behavior, and environmental factors. 2. Identify specific, articulable facts that support a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity or danger. 3. Select the least intrusive means necessary to address the identified suspicion, prioritizing officer and public safety. 4. Continuously reassess the situation and adjust actions as new information becomes available. Question 6. The performance metrics show a significant increase in reported property crimes in the downtown Fresno area over the past quarter. Considering the FPD's commitment to data-driven policing and community engagement, which of the following strategies best addresses this trend while adhering to California law and ethical policing standards? Option A. Immediately deploy additional patrol units to the downtown area during peak crime hours, focusing on visible enforcement and making arrests for minor offenses to deter criminal activity. Option B. Initiate a public awareness campaign emphasizing increased penalties for property crimes and encouraging residents to report suspicious activity while maintaining current patrol levels. Option C. Allocate resources to investigate potential external factors contributing to the crime increase, such as economic downturns or changes in neighboring jurisdictions' policing strategies, without altering current patrol patterns. Option D. Conduct a detailed analysis of crime data, identifying specific patterns, times, and locations of property crimes, and use this information to develop targeted patrol strategies and community outreach programs in collaboration with local businesses and residents. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed analysis of crime data, identifying specific patterns, times, and locations of property crimes, and use this information to develop targeted patrol strategies and community outreach programs in collaboration with local businesses and residents. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in reported property crimes in the downtown Fresno area over the past quarter. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Fresno Police Department, FPD, to balance proactive crime prevention strategies with efficient resource allocation, while also maintaining public trust and adhering to departmental policies and California state law regarding law enforcement operations and data reporting. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes and implement effective, lawful solutions. The best approach involves a comprehensive analysis of the available data, including crime patterns, demographic shifts, and community engagement levels, to inform targeted patrol strategies and community outreach programs. This aligns with the FPD's mandate to serve and protect the residents of Fresno by employing evidence-based policing methods. It also respects the principles of due process and equal protection under California law by ensuring that any interventions are non-discriminatory and based on objective criteria. Furthermore, this approach fosters collaboration with community stakeholders, which is essential for long-term crime reduction and building positive police-community relations, as encouraged by California's community policing initiatives. An incorrect approach would be to immediately increase patrols in the affected areas, without a thorough analysis of the underlying causes. This could lead to over-policing, potentially alienating residents and disproportionately impacting certain communities, which could violate civil rights principles and erode public trust. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on enforcement tactics without addressing potential contributing factors such as economic conditions or lack of social services. This reactive strategy may offer short-term relief, but fails to address the systemic issues that fuel crime, thereby not fulfilling the FPD's broader public safety mission. Finally, ignoring the data or attributing the increase to external factors without internal review would be a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the FPD's commitment to data-driven decision-making and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with objective data analysis, followed by the identification of potential causal factors. This should then lead to the development of multiple strategic options, each evaluated for its potential effectiveness, legality, ethical implications, and resource feasibility. Community input should be sought throughout this process to ensure strategies are responsive to local needs and concerns. Finally, implemented strategies should be continuously monitored and evaluated for their impact, with adjustments made as necessary. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of data access that appears to extend beyond authorized investigative parameters, potentially capturing personal information of individuals not under active investigation. Considering Fresno Police Department, FPD, policies and California state privacy laws, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for an officer observing this anomaly? Option A. Immediately report the observed anomaly to the designated supervisor and the FPD's Internal Affairs Division, while simultaneously ensuring the monitoring system is temporarily suspended to prevent further potential breaches. Option B. Attempt to fix the issue independently without reporting it to any supervisor or internal affairs. Option C. Discuss the anomaly with colleagues outside of the official reporting structure to gauge their opinions before taking any action. Option D. Ignore the anomaly, assuming it is a minor technical glitch that will resolve itself without intervention. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the observed anomaly to the designated supervisor and the FPD's Internal Affairs Division, while simultaneously ensuring the monitoring system is temporarily suspended to prevent further potential breaches. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of privacy and departmental policy regarding the handling of sensitive information. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for effective law enforcement with the fundamental rights of individuals and adherence to strict departmental regulations. The Fresno Police Department, FPD, operates under California state law and federal guidelines concerning data privacy and surveillance. A critical aspect of this challenge is ensuring that any data collected is used solely for legitimate investigative purposes and is not subject to unauthorized access or misuse. The best professional approach involves immediately reporting the observed anomaly to the designated supervisor and the FPD's Internal Affairs Division, while simultaneously ensuring the monitoring system is temporarily suspended to prevent further potential breaches. This approach is correct because it prioritizes immediate containment of the issue, transparency with departmental leadership, and adherence to FPD policy, which mandates reporting of security vulnerabilities and potential policy violations. California Penal Code sections related to privacy and surveillance, as well as FPD's internal policies on data handling and reporting, would necessitate this immediate and transparent action to protect individual privacy and maintain departmental integrity. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the anomaly, assuming it is a minor technical glitch. This fails to acknowledge the potential for significant privacy violations and the department's obligation to investigate and rectify such issues promptly. It disregards the principle of due diligence and could lead to severe legal repercussions and disciplinary action if the anomaly is indeed a breach. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to fix the issue independently without reporting it. This bypasses established reporting protocols and could lead to further complications or an incomplete resolution. It also prevents proper documentation and oversight, which are crucial for accountability and learning from such incidents. This action violates the spirit of FPD's internal control mechanisms and could be construed as an attempt to conceal a problem. A further incorrect approach would be to discuss the anomaly with colleagues outside of the official reporting structure before informing a supervisor. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could lead to the spread of unsubstantiated information, potentially damaging reputations and creating an environment of distrust. It also circumvents the proper chain of command for addressing sensitive departmental issues. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate reporting of suspicious activity or policy deviations to the appropriate authority, followed by containment measures. This framework emphasizes transparency, accountability, and adherence to established regulations and policies. When faced with a situation involving potential privacy breaches or policy violations, the first step should always be to inform a supervisor and follow departmental protocols for investigation and resolution. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates that Fresno Police Department, FPD, officers receive an anonymous tip alleging that a specific residence in Fresno, California, is being used to store stolen firearms. The tipster claims to have seen several firearms inside the home within the last 24 hours. The officers have no prior knowledge of the informant or the residence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the FPD officers to take to investigate this allegation while adhering to constitutional protections? Option A. Wait for the informant to provide more detailed information, but if no further details are forthcoming, proceed with a search of the residence based on the initial tip. Option B. Obtain a search warrant for the residence based on probable cause derived from the informant's tip, after attempting to corroborate the information if feasible. Option C. Conduct a protective sweep of the residence to ensure officer safety and look for any visible stolen firearms during the sweep. Option D. Immediately enter the residence to search for stolen firearms, as the tip alleges the presence of illegal contraband. The correct answer is B. Obtain a search warrant for the residence based on probable cause derived from the informant's tip, after attempting to corroborate the information if feasible. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Fresno Police Department, FPD, officers due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in potential evidence recovery and the constitutional rights of individuals. Balancing the immediate demands of an investigation with the strictures of the Fourth Amendment requires careful judgment and adherence to established legal precedent. Missteps can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, jeopardizing successful prosecution and undermining public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a search warrant based on probable cause before entering and searching the residence. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the protections afforded by the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, as interpreted by numerous Supreme Court decisions, including those establishing the warrant requirement for searches of private residences. The FPD is bound by these federal constitutional mandates. A warrant ensures that a neutral and detached magistrate has reviewed the evidence and determined that probable cause exists to believe that contraband or evidence of a crime will be found at the location. This process safeguards against unreasonable searches and seizures, a cornerstone of American jurisprudence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Entering the residence without a warrant and without exigent circumstances, based solely on a tip from an informant whose reliability is unproven, constitutes a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This approach fails to meet the constitutional standard for a lawful search and seizure, as it bypasses the probable cause and warrant requirements. The reliability of the informant is a critical factor in establishing probable cause, and without independent corroboration or a track record of proven reliability, their unverified tip is insufficient. Delaying entry and failing to seek a warrant while the informant provides further details, but ultimately deciding to enter without one, is also professionally unacceptable. While the informant's information might be developing, the absence of exigent circumstances, such as imminent destruction of evidence or immediate danger to life, means the constitutional requirement for a warrant remains. This approach still circumvents the necessary judicial oversight, entering the residence based on the informant's statement, and then attempting to justify the search as a protective sweep, without any articulable facts suggesting the presence of dangerous individuals, is a misapplication of that legal doctrine. A protective sweep is a limited search for individuals, not a general search for evidence, and must be based on reasonable suspicion that the area to be swept harbors an individual posing a danger to those on the scene. This approach abuses the concept of a protective sweep to conduct an unlawful search for evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional compliance. This involves 1. Assessing the totality of the circumstances to determine if probable cause exists. 2. Evaluating whether any exceptions to the warrant requirement, such as exigent circumstances, are clearly present and articulable. 3. If probable cause exists but no exceptions apply, diligently pursuing a search warrant through the appropriate judicial channels. 4. Documenting all actions and the reasoning behind them meticulously. In situations involving informant tips, officers must critically evaluate the informant's reliability and seek corroboration whenever possible before acting. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates that following a significant incident in Fresno, California, a member of the public has requested immediate, detailed information regarding the nature of the alleged offense, potential suspect profiles, and specific evidence being collected by the Fresno Police Department, FPD. Considering the FPD's obligations under California law and departmental policy, which of the following approaches best balances the public's right to information with the imperative to maintain the integrity of an ongoing investigation? Option A. Offer speculative commentary on the likely progression of the investigation and express opinions on the potential guilt or innocence of any individuals involved. Option B. Issue a general statement confirming that the FPD is investigating a reported incident, without disclosing specific details that could compromise the investigation, and direct further inquiries to the designated public information officer. Option C. Refuse to acknowledge any incident or investigation, citing the need for absolute secrecy until the case is fully resolved. Option D. Provide a comprehensive account of the alleged offense, including preliminary suspect descriptions and a list of evidence secured by officers at the scene. The correct answer is B. Issue a general statement confirming that the FPD is investigating a reported incident, without disclosing specific details that could compromise the investigation, and direct further inquiries to the designated public information officer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Fresno Police Department, FPD, officers due to the inherent tension between the public's right to information and the need to protect sensitive investigative details. Balancing transparency with the integrity of ongoing investigations requires careful judgment to avoid compromising evidence, witness safety, or the overall effectiveness of law enforcement efforts. Missteps can lead to public distrust, legal challenges, and the potential failure of an investigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and controlled release of information that confirms the occurrence of an incident and the initiation of an investigation without divulging specifics that could jeopardize the case. This approach prioritizes public awareness of police activity while safeguarding the investigative process. Specifically, the FPD, operating under California Penal Code and departmental policy, is guided by principles of responsible disclosure. Releasing a general statement confirming an investigation into a reported incident, without detailing suspect information, evidence collected, or specific investigative steps, aligns with these principles. This allows the public to be informed of police presence and activity in their community without compromising the FPD's ability to gather evidence, interview witnesses, or apprehend suspects. It respects the public's right to know, while upholding the operational necessities of law enforcement. Incorrect approach is analysis. Releasing detailed information about the nature of the alleged crime, potential suspect descriptions, or specific evidence recovered would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This premature disclosure could alert potential suspects, leading to the destruction of evidence, witness intimidation, or flight from the jurisdiction, directly undermining the FPD's investigative mandate and potentially violating California Penal Code provisions related to obstruction of justice or compromising an investigation. Providing no information whatsoever, even a general confirmation of an incident and investigation, would be professionally unacceptable. This lack of transparency can foster public speculation, breed distrust in the FPD, and create an information vacuum that can be filled with misinformation. It fails to meet the public's reasonable expectation of being informed about significant events occurring within their community, potentially violating departmental policies on public information dissemination and community engagement. Engaging in speculative commentary about the potential outcomes of the investigation, or making definitive statements about guilt or innocence before charges are filed or a conviction is secured, is also a critical failure. This violates the presumption of innocence, a fundamental legal and ethical principle, and could expose the FPD to civil liability for defamation or prejudicing a future trial. Such commentary goes beyond factual reporting and enters the realm of opinion, which is inappropriate for law enforcement in an active investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to information release. First, confirm the incident and the initiation of an investigation. Second, assess what information, if any, can be released without compromising the investigation, adhering strictly to departmental policy and relevant California laws. Third, designate a trained public information officer, PO, to be the sole conduit for official statements, ensuring consistency and accuracy. Fourth, continuously evaluate the impact of any information release on the investigation and public perception, adjusting the strategy as needed. This structured approach ensures accountability, transparency where appropriate, and the protection of investigative integrity. Question 10. During the evaluation of the Fresno Police Department's FPD overtime budget for the current fiscal year, it is noted that $300,000 has been expended by the end of August. The total annual overtime budget is $500,000. Historical data indicates that the average monthly overtime expenditure for the first 8 months of the fiscal year was $37,500. Assuming this average expenditure rate continues for the remaining 4 months of the fiscal year, what is the projected total overtime expenditure for the entire fiscal year, and what is the projected deficit or surplus? Option A. The projected total overtime expenditure is $550,000, resulting in a projected deficit of $50,000. Option B. The projected total overtime expenditure is $450,000, resulting in a projected surplus of $50,000. Option C. The projected total overtime expenditure is $500,000, resulting in a projected surplus of $0. Option D. The projected total overtime expenditure is $525,000, resulting in a projected deficit of $25,000. Correct answer is A. The projected total overtime expenditure is $550,000, resulting in a projected deficit of $50,000. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Fresno Police Department, FPD officers, managing limited resources during a period of increased demand, specifically in relation to overtime expenditures. This requires careful financial forecasting and adherence to departmental budget guidelines, which are critical for operational efficiency and accountability. The challenge lies in balancing the need for adequate staffing to respond to public safety needs with the fiscal responsibility of staying within budgetary constraints. Mismanagement can lead to operational shortfalls or necessitate difficult budget cuts later in the fiscal year. The best approach involves a proactive and data-driven method of forecasting overtime needs based on historical trends and anticipated events. This includes analyzing past overtime patterns, identifying peak demand periods, e.g., holidays, major events, and projecting future needs. By calculating the average overtime hours per officer per month and multiplying it by the number of officers, then projecting this over the remaining months of the fiscal year, a more accurate budget can be established. This method aligns with principles of sound financial management and departmental policy, ensuring that overtime expenditures are planned for and justified. For instance, if the FPD has a budget of $500,000 for overtime and has already spent $300,000 by the end of August, and the average monthly overtime expenditure for the first 8 months was $37,500, projecting this forward would indicate a potential overspend. A proactive approach would involve adjusting staffing or seeking additional budget allocation based on this projection. An approach that simply continues current overtime spending without reevaluation is flawed because it fails to account for the remaining fiscal period and potential changes in demand or resource availability. This can lead to significant budget overruns. Another incorrect approach is to arbitrarily cut overtime without considering the impact on public safety and officer workload. This can lead to decreased morale, increased stress, and potentially compromise service delivery. Finally, an approach that relies solely on reactive measures, such as waiting until the budget is nearly depleted before taking action, is inefficient and demonstrates poor financial stewardship. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data analysis, forward thinking, and adherence to established budgetary policies. This involves regularly reviewing expenditure reports, comparing them against projections, and making informed adjustments to operational plans or budget requests as needed. The goal is to maintain operational effectiveness while ensuring fiscal responsibility. Question 11. What factors determine the legality of a vehicle search conducted by a Fresno Police Department officer during a lawful traffic stop in California, when the officer has a hunch but no concrete evidence of criminal activity? Option A. The officer's subjective belief that criminal activity might be occurring in the area, leading to a generalized suspicion. Option B. The driver's failure to explicitly refuse the officer's request to search the vehicle. Option C. The assumption that drivers on public roads implicitly consent to vehicle searches by law enforcement. Option D. The officer's ability to articulate specific, observable facts that led to the stop and the voluntary, affirmative consent of the driver to the search. The correct answer is D. The officer's ability to articulate specific, observable facts that led to the stop and the voluntary, affirmative consent of the driver to the search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal rights of an individual during a roadside stop. The officer must act within the confines of California law, specifically the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution as interpreted by California courts regarding searches and seizures. Misinterpreting the scope of permissible inquiry or action can lead to evidence being suppressed, departmental discipline, or civil liability. The pressure of a potential ongoing crime necessitates swift action, but haste must not override legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly articulating the specific, articulable facts that led to the stop, and then requesting consent to search based on those facts. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights by not presuming consent or probable cause where it doesn't exist. California law, consistent with federal precedent, requires that consent to search be voluntary and intelligent. By explaining the basis for the suspicion, the officer provides context for the request, making it more likely that any consent given is truly voluntary. This aligns with the principles of lawful policing and community trust. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer demanding to search the vehicle without articulating any specific suspicion beyond a general feeling or a broad statement about the area. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as it lacks the necessary reasonable suspicion to justify a prolonged detention or a search without consent. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to proceed with a search based on the driver's silence or lack of explicit refusal. Silence does not constitute consent. California law, like federal law, requires affirmative consent. A search conducted under these circumstances would be considered unlawful, and the evidence obtained would likely be inadmissible in court. A further incorrect approach is for the officer to claim they have implied consent to search because the driver is operating a vehicle on public roads. There is no such general implied consent to search a vehicle in California simply by virtue of driving. Such a claim misrepresents the law and infringes upon an individual's constitutional rights. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal precedent. When initiating a stop, officers must be able to articulate specific, objective facts that support their suspicion. During the encounter, they should clearly communicate the reason for their actions and any requests they make. If a search is contemplated, officers should seek voluntary consent, explaining the basis for their suspicion. If probable cause exists, they must be able to articulate those specific facts. In all interactions, maintaining professionalism, respect for individual rights, and adherence to the law are paramount. Question 12. Operational review demonstrates that a significant community event in Fresno has generated public concern and media interest regarding a recent, ongoing criminal investigation. Officers on scene are receiving numerous inquiries from concerned citizens and local news outlets seeking details about the investigation's progress and potential outcomes. Which of the following approaches best balances the public's right to information with the FPD's responsibility to maintain investigative integrity and comply with California law? Option A. Share preliminary findings and potential suspect information directly with a trusted local news reporter to ensure the public receives timely updates. Option B. Designate a Public Information Officer, PO, to serve as the sole point of contact for all media inquiries, providing carefully vetted, authorized statements that confirm the investigation is active without compromising sensitive details. Option C. Issue a brief, non-specific statement to the media indicating that the FPD is aware of the situation and looking into it. Option D. Engage in informal discussions with community members at the event, sharing details about the investigation's direction and potential leads. The correct answer is B. Designate a Public Information Officer, PO, to serve as the sole point of contact for all media inquiries, providing carefully vetted, authorized statements that confirm the investigation is active without compromising sensitive details. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Fresno Police Department, FPD, officers due to the inherent tension between the public's right to information and the need to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation. Balancing transparency with investigative effectiveness requires careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. Missteps can compromise the investigation, erode public trust, and potentially lead to legal challenges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a controlled and authorized release of information through designated channels. This approach ensures that any information shared is accurate, relevant, and does not jeopardize the investigation. It aligns with FPD policy and California Penal Code sections governing the disclosure of information related to ongoing investigations, which emphasize the importance of preventing prejudice to the investigation or the rights of individuals involved. This method upholds both public accountability and the operational needs of law enforcement. Incorrect approach is analysis. Sharing preliminary findings directly with a local news reporter without authorization is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses established FPD procedures for information dissemination and violates the principle of maintaining investigative confidentiality. Such an action could alert suspects, allow for the destruction of evidence, or influence witness testimony, thereby prejudicing the investigation, which is contrary to the spirit and letter of investigative protocols designed to ensure fair and effective law enforcement. Providing a general statement to the media that the FPD is looking into the matter, without any specific details, is also problematic. While seemingly innocuous, this approach can create public speculation and misinformation if not managed carefully. It lacks the proactive transparency that can build trust, and if the public perceives a lack of substantive action, it can lead to distrust. Furthermore, it fails to leverage the opportunity for controlled communication to inform the public appropriately. Discussing the specifics of the investigation, including potential suspect descriptions or motives, with community members at a local gathering, is a severe breach of protocol. This not only risks compromising the investigation by revealing sensitive details to individuals who may have no direct role or need to know, but also violates the privacy of individuals involved and could lead to the spread of rumors and inaccurate information, potentially inciting fear or prejudice within the community. Professional reasoning. Law enforcement professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and relevant state laws. When faced with media or public inquiries about an ongoing investigation, the process should involve 1. Identifying the nature of the inquiry and the information requested. 2. Consulting departmental policy and legal counsel regarding disclosure limitations. 3. Directing all inquiries to the designated Public Information Officer, PO, or authorized spokesperson. 4. If authorized to speak, providing only factual, unclassified information that does not compromise the investigation or individual rights. This structured approach ensures accountability, maintains investigative integrity, and fosters public trust through responsible communication. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that Fresno Police Department officers frequently encounter situations requiring access to personal data held by third-party service providers to investigate potential criminal activity. Considering the strict privacy protections afforded under California law, specifically the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, as amended by the California Privacy Rights Act, CPRA, which approach should an officer prioritize when seeking to obtain subscriber information from an internet service provider to investigate a credible report of a cybercrime affecting residents of Fresno? Option A. Immediately seek a search warrant from a magistrate, detailing the specific information sought and the probable cause supporting the belief that this information is evidence of a crime. Option B. Access the data directly from the service provider based on the officer's professional judgment that the information is critical to an ongoing investigation. Option C. Submit an informal, written request to the internet service provider, explaining the urgency of the investigation and asking for their voluntary cooperation. Option D. Request all available subscriber data associated with the IP address in question, without further specificity, to ensure no relevant information is missed. The correct answer is A. Immediately seek a search warrant from a magistrate, detailing the specific information sought and the probable cause supporting the belief that this information is evidence of a crime. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the strict privacy rights afforded to individuals under California law, specifically the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, as amended by the California Privacy Rights Act, CPRA. Officers must act decisively, but also within legal boundaries to avoid violating privacy rights, which could lead to civil liability for the Fresno Police Department and undermine public trust. The urgency of the situation necessitates a rapid response, but the legal framework demands a structured and justified approach to data access. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and is further reinforced by California's specific privacy protections under the CCPA/CPRA. A warrant, issued by a neutral magistrate after reviewing evidence demonstrating probable cause, provides the legal authority for law enforcement to access personal information held by a third-party service provider, even if that information is otherwise protected. This process ensures that the intrusion into an individual's privacy is justified by a specific, articulable need related to criminal activity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Accessing the data without a warrant, even with a stated belief that it is necessary for an ongoing investigation, is a direct violation of the CCPA/CPRA and Fourth Amendment principles. The CCPA/CPRA grants consumers rights over their personal information, and law enforcement access is generally permissible only through established legal processes like warrants, subpoenas, or court orders. Relying solely on an internal belief of necessity bypasses the judicial oversight required to balance public safety with individual privacy. Requesting the data from the service provider through an informal, non-legal request, even if the provider is cooperative, is also procedurally flawed. While the provider might comply, this action does not confer legal authority for the Fresno Police Department to obtain the information. It circumvents the established legal channels designed to protect privacy and ensure accountability. Such an approach could expose the department to legal challenges and set a dangerous precedent for data access. Using a broad, generalized request for information without specifying the exact data needed or the probable cause for its necessity is insufficient. The CCPA/CPRA, while allowing for law enforcement access under certain conditions, still requires a level of specificity to ensure that the access is narrowly tailored to the investigation. A vague request risks overreach and a violation of privacy rights, as it does not demonstrate a clear nexus between the requested data and the suspected criminal activity. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a situation requiring access to protected personal information, the first step is to identify the relevant legal framework, in this case, California's CCPA/CPRA and constitutional protections. The next step is to assess the available legal mechanisms for obtaining the information. If probable cause exists for a suspected criminal offense, pursuing a search warrant through the judicial system is the most appropriate and legally sound method. This process ensures that the intrusion is justified, proportionate, and authorized by a neutral third party, thereby safeguarding both public safety and individual privacy rights. Question 14. Strategic planning requires the Fresno Police Department, FPD, to consider the diverse needs and expectations of its constituents. Considering the FPD's operational environment within Fresno, California, which of the following approaches best ensures the development of a comprehensive and publicly supported strategic plan? Option A. Rely exclusively on internal performance metrics and historical crime data to identify areas for improvement and future direction. Option B. Conduct extensive outreach to community leaders, sworn officers, civilian staff, and oversight bodies to gather input and build consensus on departmental goals and priorities. Option C. Authorize a select group of senior command staff to develop the plan based on their professional judgment and experience. Option D. Focus primarily on the immediate tactical needs and resource allocation, requests submitted by patrol divisions to enhance response times. The correct answer is B. Conduct extensive outreach to community leaders, sworn officers, civilian staff, and oversight bodies to gather input and build consensus on departmental goals and priorities. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of various stakeholder interests, especially within a public service organization like the Fresno Police Department, FPD. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands balancing the immediate operational needs of the FPD with the long-term public trust and accountability mandated by California law and FPD policy. The FPD operates under the California Penal Code and Departmental General Orders, which emphasize transparency, community engagement, and efficient resource allocation. Mismanaging stakeholder expectations or failing to integrate their feedback can lead to decreased public confidence, operational inefficiencies, and potential legal challenges. The best approach involves proactively engaging all key stakeholders, including community leaders, sworn officers, civilian staff, and oversight bodies, to gather diverse perspectives and build consensus on strategic priorities. This collaborative method ensures that the strategic plan is comprehensive, addresses the needs of the entire Fresno community, and aligns with legal and ethical obligations. By fostering an environment of open communication and shared responsibility, the FPD can develop a plan that is both effective and widely supported, thereby enhancing public safety and trust, as required by California's commitment to community policing principles. An approach that prioritizes only the immediate operational demands of sworn officers, without adequately consulting community representatives or civilian staff, fails to acknowledge the broader accountability framework. This oversight neglects the crucial element of public trust, which is a cornerstone of effective law enforcement in California. Such a narrow focus risks creating a plan that is perceived as insular and unresponsive to community concerns, potentially undermining the FPD's legitimacy and effectiveness. Another unacceptable approach is to solely rely on historical data and internal assessments without seeking external input. While data is important, it does not capture the evolving needs and perceptions of the community. California law and FPD policy encourage a dynamic approach to policing that adapts to societal changes and community feedback. Ignoring these external factors can lead to a strategic plan that is outdated or irrelevant to the current challenges faced by Fresno. Finally, an approach that delegates the entire strategic planning process to a small, unelected committee without broad consultation is also professionally unsound. This method bypasses the democratic principles of public service and accountability inherent in California law. It fails to leverage the collective knowledge and experience of the diverse stakeholders who are directly impacted by the FPD's operations and strategic direction. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and understanding their interests and concerns. This should be followed by establishing clear communication channels and feedback mechanisms. The next step involves synthesizing this information with operational data and legal requirements to develop a draft plan. Finally, a robust review and validation process with stakeholders is essential before final adoption, ensuring the plan is equitable, effective, and legally compliant. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that officers of the Fresno Police Department, FPD, frequently encounter situations requiring immediate action based on observed behavior. In a recent incident, an FPD officer stops an individual based on a general feeling of unease and the fact that the individual was walking in a neighborhood known for recent property crimes. The officer then conducts a pat-down search, finding contraband, which approach best reflects the FPD's obligation to uphold constitutional rights and departmental policy in such a scenario. Option A. The officer was justified in stopping and searching the individual based on the general feeling of unease and the individual's presence in a high-crime area. Option B. The officer should have proceeded with the stop and search based on the hunch, as the discovery of contraband validated the initial suspicion. Option C. The officer should have delayed documenting the specific reasons for the stop and search until after the contraband was secured, to avoid alerting the individual. Option D. The officer should have meticulously documented all specific, observable behaviors and environmental factors that contributed to a reasonable suspicion that the individual was involved in criminal activity before initiating the stop and search. The correct answer is D. The officer should have meticulously documented all specific, observable behaviors and environmental factors that contributed to a reasonable suspicion that the individual was involved in criminal activity before initiating the stop and search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between departmental efficiency and the constitutional rights of individuals encountered during law enforcement activities. The Fresno Police Department, FPD, operates within the framework of California law and the U.S. Constitution, requiring officers to balance the need for thorough investigation with the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The pressure to quickly resolve incidents and maintain public order can sometimes lead to decisions that, upon closer examination, may infringe upon established legal protections. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative techniques are both effective and legally sound. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves officers meticulously documenting all observations and articulable facts that form the basis for any stop or search. This approach aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and California Penal Code Section 1538(5), which require probable cause or reasonable suspicion, supported by specific facts, to justify a search or seizure. By detailing the observed behaviors, environmental factors, and any other concrete evidence that led to their suspicion, officers create a clear, defensible record that demonstrates their actions were not arbitrary but based on objective criteria. This meticulous documentation is crucial for internal review, potential legal challenges, and maintaining public trust by showing accountability and adherence to legal standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on vague generalizations or hunches without specific, observable facts. This fails to meet the legal standard for reasonable suspicion or probable cause, potentially leading to unlawful stops and searches that violate Fourth Amendment protections. Such actions can result in evidence being suppressed in court and disciplinary action against the officer. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a search based solely on the individual's presence in a high-crime area without any independent, articulable suspicion related to that individual's conduct. While location can be a factor, it is insufficient on its own to justify a stop or search. This approach risks profiling and discriminatory practices, undermining the FPD's commitment to equitable law enforcement. A third incorrect approach is to delay or omit documentation of the specific reasons for a stop or search, hoping to fill in details later or assuming the justification is self-evident. This lack of contemporaneous and specific documentation creates a significant legal vulnerability. It suggests a lack of transparency and can be interpreted as an attempt to retroactively justify an action that lacked a proper legal basis at the time it occurred, thereby failing to uphold the principles of due process and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal standards and ethical principles. This involves a continuous assessment of the situation against established legal requirements, e.g., Fourth Amendment, California Penal Code, and departmental policy. Before taking any action that may infringe on an individual's rights, Officers must be able to articulate specific, objective facts that justify their suspicion. Thorough and accurate documentation should be an immediate part of the process, serving as a record of adherence to these standards and a safeguard against potential legal challenges. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or seeking legal guidance is a prudent step to ensure actions are legally sound. Question 16. Compliance review shows that Fresno Police Department officers responded to a noise complaint that escalated into a report of potential illegal activity at a private residence. A neighbor reported seeing suspicious items being brought into the home and expressed concern about the occupant's well-being, mentioning they had been acting erratically. The occupant is known to have a history of mental health issues. Officers have not yet established probable cause for a crime, but they are concerned about the potential for illegal contraband or evidence of a crime within the residence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the responding officers in Fresno, California, under these circumstances? Option A. Advise the neighbor that the FPD cannot act without direct observation of a crime and leave the scene, documenting the complaint for future reference. Option B. Secure the perimeter of the residence and seek a search warrant from a judge based on the neighbor's report and the occupant's history, while ensuring the occupant's immediate safety is not compromised. Option C. Enter the residence immediately to investigate the neighbor's claims and assess the situation, as the occupant's erratic behavior and potential mental health crisis could constitute exigent circumstances. Option D. Ask the neighbor for consent to enter their property and look through their windows to observe the suspect's residence, as this is a less intrusive method of gathering information. The correct answer is B. Secure the perimeter of the residence and seek a search warrant from a judge based on the neighbor's report and the occupant's history, while ensuring the occupant's immediate safety is not compromised. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and ensure due process. Officers must act decisively, but also within the strict confines of California law and FPD policy regarding search and seizure, particularly when dealing with individuals who may be experiencing a mental health crisis. Missteps can lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and enforced by California law. By seeking a warrant, officers demonstrate a commitment to due process and ensure that any evidence obtained is legally admissible. This method prioritizes lawful procedure over expediency, which is paramount in maintaining the integrity of investigations and the credibility of the FPD. Incorrect approach is analysis, approaching the individual without establishing probable cause and attempting to search their person or immediate belongings based solely on a neighbor's report, without exigent circumstances, violates the Fourth Amendment and California Penal Code sections related to search and seizure. This bypasses the warrant requirement and could lead to the exclusion of any discovered evidence. Entering the individual's residence without consent or exigent circumstances, even with the neighbor's permission to enter the property, constitutes an unlawful search under the Fourth Amendment and California law. The neighbor's consent does not extend to searching the individual's private dwelling. Delaying the investigation indefinitely and failing to pursue any lawful means to gather information, such as seeking a warrant or interviewing other potential witnesses, would be an abdication of duty. While respecting rights is crucial, officers also have a responsibility to investigate potential criminal activity when legally permissible. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to decision-making. First, assess the situation for immediate threats to safety, exigent circumstances. Second, determine if probable cause exists to justify a search or seizure. Third, if probable cause exists, evaluate whether a warrant is required or if an exception to the warrant requirement applies, e.g., consent, plain view, search incident to lawful arrest. Fourth, consult with supervisors and legal counsel when in doubt. In this case, the absence of immediate danger and the need to search a private area strongly indicate the necessity of a warrant. Question 17. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate resource allocation within the Fresno Police Department, FPD. Considering the department's mandate to serve and protect the citizens of Fresno, which of the following approaches best balances operational effectiveness, community trust, and adherence to California's legal and ethical standards for law enforcement. Option A. Implement immediate cost-saving measures by reducing patrol visibility in lower crime areas to reallocate funds to specialized units, without extensive community consultation. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive assessment involving input from diverse community stakeholders and FPD personnel to inform resource allocation decisions, prioritizing areas with the greatest demonstrated need and potential for positive impact. Option C. Prioritize resource allocation based on the loudest departmental requests and historical spending patterns, assuming these reflect current operational necessities. Option D. Focus resource reallocation solely on addressing the most visible or politically sensitive crime issues, even if data suggests other areas require more urgent attention. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive assessment involving input from diverse community stakeholders and FPD personnel to inform resource allocation decisions, prioritizing areas with the greatest demonstrated need and potential for positive impact. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate resource allocation within the Fresno Police Department, FPD. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of public safety with the long-term strategic goals of the department, all while adhering to the specific legal and ethical obligations governing law enforcement in California. Decisions made here can directly impact community trust, officer morale, and the department's ability to effectively serve the citizens of Fresno. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed changes are not only efficient, but also equitable and legally sound. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes community impact and officer well-being alongside operational efficiency. This means engaging with diverse community stakeholders, including residents, business owners, and advocacy groups, to understand their concerns and priorities regarding police services. Simultaneously, it necessitates consulting with FPD officers and their representatives to gauge the impact of potential changes on their ability to perform their duties effectively and safely. This collaborative method ensures that resource allocation decisions are informed by real-world needs and perspectives, aligning with the FPD's mission to serve and protect the people of Fresno in a manner consistent with California law and ethical policing standards. This aligns with the principles of community policing and accountability, which are fundamental to effective law enforcement in California. An approach that solely focuses on cost-saving measures without considering the impact on community relations or officer capacity is professionally unacceptable. Such a narrow focus risks alienating the community, potentially leading to decreased cooperation and increased crime, and could overburden officers, leading to burnout and reduced effectiveness. This would violate the ethical obligation to serve the public interest and could indirectly contravene California Penal Code sections related to the proper and effective discharge of police duties. Another unacceptable approach is to implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or the loudest voices within the department, without a systematic evaluation of data or broader community input. This can lead to biased decision-making that does not reflect the actual needs of the entire Fresno community and may overlook critical areas requiring resources. It fails to uphold the principle of equitable service delivery and could lead to the misallocation of limited resources, undermining the department's effectiveness and public trust. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the perceived needs of one specific demographic or neighborhood over others without a data-driven justification is also professionally unsound. This can lead to perceptions of favoritism or neglect, eroding trust and potentially exacerbating existing community tensions. Effective resource allocation must be based on objective analysis of crime patterns, community needs assessments, and departmental operational requirements, ensuring fair and impartial service across all of Fresno. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or objective, in this case, resource allocation efficiency. This should be followed by gathering comprehensive data, including operational statistics, community feedback, and officer input. Next, potential solutions should be brainstormed and evaluated against established criteria, such as effectiveness, equity, legality, and community impact. Finally, the chosen solution should be implemented, monitored, and adjusted as needed, with a commitment to transparency and accountability throughout the process. Question 18. Market research demonstrates that public trust in law enforcement is significantly influenced by transparency and accountability. During a lawful traffic stop on a public street in Fresno, California, a citizen begins recording the interaction with their mobile phone from the sidewalk, maintaining a distance of approximately 15 feet and not speaking to the officer or the driver. The officer, feeling uncomfortable with being recorded, orders the citizen to stop recording and to move further away, stating it is interfering with their duties. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the Fresno Police Department officer in this scenario? Option A. Physically approach the citizen, demand they hand over their recording device, and confiscate it pending further investigation into potential privacy violations. Option B. Calmly acknowledge the citizen's right to record from a public space, explain that the recording should not interfere with the officer's duties, and continue with the lawful traffic stop, ensuring the citizen remains at a safe and non-obstructive distance. Option C. Immediately order the citizen to cease recording and move further away, citing potential interference with official duties, without further explanation or assessment of actual interference. Option D. Ignore the citizen's recording and proceed with the traffic stop in a manner that might be perceived as overly assertive or intimidating, hoping to discourage further recording. Correct answer is B. Calmly acknowledge the citizen's right to record from a public space, explain that the recording should not interfere with the officer's duties, and continue with the lawful traffic stop, ensuring the citizen remains at a safe and non-obstructive distance. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a citizen's right to record and a law enforcement officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance the public's right to observe and document police activity with the need to prevent interference with official duties, potential safety risks, and the protection of individual privacy, where applicable. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate recording and actions that impede lawful police operations. The correct approach involves de-escalating the situation by calmly explaining the officer's actions and the legal basis for them, while also acknowledging the citizen's right to record from a safe and non-obstructive distance. This approach respects the public's right to transparency and accountability, as enshrined in principles of open government and the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects freedom of speech and the press, including the right to observe and record government actions in public spaces. By engaging respectfully and setting clear boundaries for non-interference, the officer upholds both public trust and departmental policy regarding citizen interactions. An incorrect approach of immediately ordering the citizen to stop recording without a clear and present danger of interference or a violation of specific privacy laws, e.g., recording in a private residence without consent, is ethically and legally problematic. This action could be construed as an infringement on First Amendment rights and may violate departmental policies designed to foster positive community relations and transparency. Such an action undermines public trust and could lead to formal complaints or legal challenges. Another incorrect approach of physically confiscating the citizen's recording device without probable cause or a warrant is a severe violation of constitutional rights, specifically the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. This action would expose the officer and the department to significant legal liability and disciplinary action. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of legal boundaries and an abuse of authority. A further incorrect approach of ignoring the citizen's recording and continuing with potentially aggressive or unnecessary actions that could be perceived as intimidation is also professionally unsound. While not directly confronting the recording, the officer's behavior could be interpreted as an attempt to deter recording through intimidation, which is unethical and counterproductive to building community trust. It fails to address the situation proactively and could lead to negative perceptions of police conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, clear communication, and adherence to constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves assessing the situation for actual threats or interference, understanding the legal parameters of citizen recording in public spaces, and engaging with citizens respectfully while maintaining operational control and safety. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or seeking legal guidance is a prudent step. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to reinforce best practices in domestic violence response for Fresno Police Department (FPD) officers. During a call to a residence in Fresno, officers arrive to find a visibly distressed individual who initially reports a physical altercation with their partner. However, upon further questioning, the individual becomes hesitant, minimizes the incident, and states they do not wish to press charges or have their partner arrested, citing fear of retaliation. The partner is present at the residence and denies any physical contact, claiming the initial report was an overreaction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the FPD officers in this situation, adhering to California law and FPD policy? Option A. Attempt to mediate the situation between the two individuals, encouraging them to resolve their differences peacefully, and advising them that further intervention by the police is not necessary if they can agree to de-escalate. Option B. Conduct a thorough, independent investigation by interviewing both parties separately, observing the scene for any signs of struggle or injury, collecting any available physical evidence, and documenting all findings objectively to establish probable cause, making an arrest if warranted by the evidence, regardless of the victim's current willingness to cooperate. Option C. Accept the victim's current statement that they do not wish to press charges and do not want their partner arrested, and conclude the investigation without further action, as the victim is the primary party to decide on prosecution. Option D. Immediately cease the investigation and leave the scene, informing both parties that since the victim is unwilling to press charges, the FPD cannot intervene further in domestic disputes. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough, independent investigation by interviewing both parties separately, observing the scene for any signs of struggle or injury, collecting any available physical evidence, and documenting all findings objectively to establish probable cause, making an arrest if warranted by the evidence, regardless of the victim's current willingness to cooperate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Fresno Police Department, FPD, officers due to the sensitive nature of domestic violence investigations and the potential for conflicting information from involved parties. The need for thoroughness, impartiality, and adherence to California Penal Code sections related to domestic violence is paramount. Officers must navigate situations where victims may recant or minimize the abuse, and perpetrators may attempt to manipulate the narrative. Careful judgment is required to ensure the safety of all parties, particularly the victim, and to gather sufficient evidence for potential prosecution, all while respecting individual rights and departmental policy. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves prioritizing the victim's safety and well-being by conducting a thorough, independent investigation. This includes interviewing all parties separately, observing the scene for signs of struggle or injury, and collecting any available physical evidence. The officer should then document all findings objectively, regardless of whether the victim is cooperative or recants their initial statement. This aligns with FPD policy and California law, which mandates officers to investigate all domestic violence calls and make an arrest if probable cause exists, even if the victim is unwilling to cooperate. The focus is on gathering objective evidence to establish probable cause, recognizing that victims may be coerced or fearful. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that involves solely relying on the victim's current statement, especially if it minimizes or denies the abuse, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the dynamics of domestic violence, where victims may be under duress or fear retaliation. It bypasses the legal requirement to investigate based on probable cause, potentially leaving the victim unprotected and the perpetrator unheld accountable. An approach that involves dismissing the call due to the victim's reluctance to press charges is also professionally unacceptable. This ignores the FPD's duty to investigate all domestic violence incidents and the potential for ongoing danger. California law empowers officers to make arrests based on probable cause, irrespective of the victim's immediate willingness to participate in the prosecution. An approach that involves attempting to mediate the dispute between the parties without conducting a full investigation is professionally unacceptable. Mediation is inappropriate in domestic violence situations, as it can re-victimize the abused party and fail to address the underlying power imbalance and potential for future violence. It also neglects the legal obligation to investigate and gather evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes victim safety, adheres strictly to departmental policy and California Penal Code, and maintains impartiality. This involves a systematic approach, First, ensure immediate safety. Second, conduct separate interviews. Third, meticulously document all observations and statements. Fourth, gather and preserve all available evidence. And finally, make an arrest if probable cause exists, regardless of the victim's immediate cooperation. This framework ensures that investigations are thorough, legally sound, and ethically responsible, protecting both the public and the integrity of the FPD. Question 20. System analysis indicates that Officer Miller worked a total of 5 hours during a pay period. Of these, 32 hours were regular duty at a base rate of $25.00 per hour. The remaining hours were overtime. According to Fresno Police Department policy and California Labor Code, overtime hours worked beyond 8 in a single day or 40 in a single week are paid at 1.5 times the regular rate. Officer Miller worked 10 hours on Monday, 5 hours on Tuesday, 9 hours on Wednesday, 8 hours on Thursday, and 10 hours on Friday. What is the total overtime pay Officer Miller is entitled to for this pay period? Option A, $206.25. Option B, $187.50. Option C, $225.00. Option D, $168.75. The correct answer is A, $206.25. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Fresno Police Department (FPD) officers, accurately calculating overtime pay while adhering to departmental policy and California labor law. The complexity arises from the need to account for different pay rates, potential rounding rules, and the precise tracking of hours worked, especially when dealing with partial hours or specific departmental directives on how to handle overtime accrual. Failure to calculate correctly can lead to underpayment or overpayment of officers, impacting morale, potentially leading to grievances, and exposing the FPD to legal challenges regarding wage and hour compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a precise, step-by-step calculation that directly applies the FPD's overtime policy and relevant California Labor Code provisions. This means converting all hours to a consistent unit, e.g., decimal hours, applying the correct overtime multiplier based on the FPD's policy, e.g., 5 times the regular rate for hours exceeding 8 in a day or 40 in a week, as per California law, unless FPD policy specifies otherwise for specific scenarios, and ensuring that any departmental rounding rules are applied consistently and in accordance with legal requirements. This method guarantees accuracy and compliance, preventing financial discrepancies and upholding departmental standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply multiplying the total overtime hours by a single, assumed overtime rate, without considering the daily or weekly threshold stipulated by California law or FPD policy. This fails to account for the nuances of overtime calculation, potentially misclassifying regular hours as overtime or vice versa, and violating wage and hour regulations. Another incorrect approach is to round the total overtime hours to the nearest whole hour before applying the overtime rate. This can lead to minor inaccuracies that, over time, can accumulate into significant underpayments or overpayments, and may not align with specific departmental or state guidelines on how partial hours should be compensated. A third incorrect approach is to use an average overtime rate across all overtime hours worked, without differentiating between hours that qualify for a standard overtime multiplier and those that might qualify for a higher multiplier, e.g., double time, if applicable under specific FPD policy or state law for certain holidays or extended shifts. This oversimplification ignores the tiered nature of overtime pay and can result in incorrect compensation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach overtime calculations by first understanding the governing policies and laws. This involves consulting the FPD's internal overtime policy and referencing the California Labor Code, specifically sections pertaining to overtime pay. The process should be methodical. 1. Determine the regular hourly rate of pay. 2. Accurately record all hours worked, distinguishing between regular and overtime hours based on daily and weekly thresholds. 3. Apply the correct overtime multiplier as per FPD policy and California law. 4. Perform calculations using precise figures, avoiding premature rounding. 5. Double-check the final calculation against the policy and legal requirements. This systematic approach ensures accuracy, fairness, and compliance,